My daughter said I was confused while I lay behind glass, unable to answer quickly enough for her liking. Claire held a folder above the hospital blanket, and its cover was beige, its corners were bent, and a date sat near the signature line. I had seen that date before, and it belonged to a year when my wife was dying, when fear filled our house and every form felt urgent. "He cannot tell you what he wants," Claire said. "I know what he wants." She signed her name beneath the words. I watched the pen leave the paper, and I watched her place the folder beside my water cup. Then I looked through the glass door at Samuel Price, my lawyer, walking toward the family consultation room with a blue document cover under his arm. Claire believed sickness had made me helpless, and she had missed one detail. The paper she carried had been replaced. Before I tell you why I let her keep writing, drop your comment where your voice mattered and think about the moment someone decided age, grief, or illness meant they could speak over you. Like if calm matters. My name is Arthur Bell, and I was 72 in the winter of 2020, a widower, a retired electrician, and a man who had spent 46 years learning what happens when somebody treats a warning as permission. Claire was my only child. For most of her life, I had taken pride in making hard things easier for her, and her mother, Helen, and I paid for tutors when science became serious. We paid for the first apartment near college, and we paid the part of medical school that grants and loans did not reach. During her residency, when her hours were long and her pay was thin, I covered rent twice and told her it was temporary. Temporary became familiar. There was a car after her old one began making noises, and there was furniture when she moved into a better building. There was a vacation deposit after she said she had not rested in 2 years, and there were dinners, repairs, professional dues, and a kitchen renovation that became my business because the contractor called me when Claire stopped returning messages. Helen used to raise one eyebrow whenever I said yes too quickly. "Helping is a gift," she would say. "A gift is not a seat at someone else's steering wheel." I heard her. I did not always listen. The hospital room was cold in the ordinary way. Hospitals are cold, and the windows showed a gray Ohio afternoon. Snow had started before dawn, and the parking lot looked erased at the edges, and people moved through the hall in masks, carrying clipboards and bags, each person trying to keep a small order inside a season that had broken everyone's routine. COVID had put me there 6 days earlier, and I will not turn those days into a clinical lesson. I remember exhaustion, the sound of my own breath, and the humiliating fact that I needed time before a sentence arrived, and that was enough for Claire to decide I had become somebody else. She had come in wearing a dark coat over her work clothes, and her hair was pulled back, and her eyes were dry. Claire had always looked composed in a crisis, and when she was 12, she had held the flashlight while I changed a breaker in our basement. When she was 26, she had stood beside Helen's hospital bed and asked questions nobody else knew to ask. That history made the moment worse. The nurse had told Claire that questions about my wishes needed to be handled carefully because I had records on file. Claire nodded. Then she turned toward me, lowered her voice, and said I had been confused since admission. "Dad gets stubborn when he is frightened," she told the room. "He would not want people to keep pushing him through things." I looked at her hand, and her thumb rested on the old folder. A narrow gold ring from her graduation sat above the knuckle, and Helen had bought it for her after Claire received the white coat she had wanted since high school. The date on the copy was April 2018. Helen died in November of that year. I revised my wishes the following spring. Claire knew that. I could see the nurse studying the papers without making a decision, and I could see Claire waiting for somebody to accept her confidence as proof. She was a physician, and people had spent years treating her certainty as a useful thing. It often was useful. But certainty without authority is only pressure dressed well. Samuel arrived before anyone acted on the paper. He did not storm into the room, and Samuel had known my family for 30 years. He had closed the sale of our first house, helped Helen and me set up the small account that paid Claire's tuition, and attended Helen's funeral from the back row with his coat buttoned to the throat against rain. He stood beside the door and waited until the nurse looked at him. I represent Mr. Bell, he said. I have the original file concerning his current instructions. Claire turned so fast that her folder touched the bed rail. This is a private medical matter, she said. It is a matter of Mr. Bell's recorded wishes, Samuel answered. That is why I am here. Then he placed the blue cover beside her beige copy. Claire looked at it as if she had found an old ghost sitting in my room. The cover had belonged in a drawer beneath Helen's sewing table, as she bought it at a stationery store in 1994 because the clasp was sturdy and the cardboard did not bend in a crowded drawer. Inside it, she kept things she did not trust us to lose: insurance cards, warranty papers, a handwritten list of the neighbors who had keys to our house, and later, when she became ill, she placed our important instructions inside it. The blue was faded along the edges from her fingers. I had taken it out after she died and put it back too quickly, and grief makes ordinary objects feel like witnesses. You begin to fear they will ask what you did with the person who used to touch them. Samuel opened the cover and slid a single sheet across the table toward Claire. The first line read, "This revocation replaces every prior directive and removes Claire Bell from any role in Arthur Bell's medical or financial decisions." Claire's face did not change all at once. Her mouth tightened. Her eyes moved from the line to me, and then she looked at Samuel, perhaps waiting for him to soften it with legal language. He did not. I had said nothing, because I wanted to hear what Claire would claim when she believed the older paper had protected her. She looked toward the nurse. "He signed it when he was grieving," she said. "My mother had just died. He was angry with me." The nurse did not answer, and she only said the documents would be reviewed through the appropriate people before anyone treated Claire as my representative. That was the first limit. It was small. It mattered. Claire picked up her folder and said she needed air, and she left without touching my shoulder. Samuel waited until the door closed. "Can you understand me?" he asked. I nodded. "Do you want Martin Cole involved as the person you named?" I nodded again. "Do you want me to preserve every request Claire has made today?" My hand found the call button, and I pressed it once, then rested my palm on the blue cover. Samuel understood. Helen understood that difference before I did. We met when I was 23 and working nights for a contractor who paid in cash whenever the owner felt generous, and Helen taught third grade in a brick school on the east side of Dayton. She wore her brown hair short, kept pencils behind one ear, and refused to let any child call himself stupid in her classroom. I first saw her carrying a cardboard box of library books through rain, and the bottom had split, and paperbacks were sliding onto the sidewalk. I was driving a service van with a ladder tied to the roof, and I stopped, picked up the books, and spent 10 minutes pretending I had not noticed which one she protected first. It was a copy of The Secret Garden with a child's name written inside. Helen married me 2 years later, and we never had much money at the beginning. We had a duplex with windows that froze from the inside, one decent couch, and a kitchen light that flickered until I learned which wire had been pinched behind the plaster. She made ordinary life feel planned. When Claire was born, Helen taped a note inside the blue document cover, and it listed the pediatrician's number, the daycare address, and the name of Helen's sister in Michigan. I teased her for preparing for a disaster before we had learned how to install a car seat. Helen smiled and said, "I prepare so panic does not get to decide." That sentence stayed with me after she was gone. Claire grew up bright and quick, and she could identify birds by sound before she could ride a bike without falling. She wanted to be a doctor after a neighbor collapsed at a summer cookout, and the ambulance crew let her hold a blanket around his wife's shoulders. "I want to be the person who knows what to do," she told us that night. Helen kissed her forehead. "Then learn to ask before you decide," she said. Claire did learn. She studied harder than either of us had, and she carried flashcards to family dinners. She worked weekends at a pharmacy, and when medical school accepted her, she ran through our kitchen holding the letter over her head while Helen cried into a dish towel. I paid the first tuition bill at our table. The number frightened me. I wrote the check anyway. Claire hugged me from behind and said, "I will make you proud." She did. For years, every sacrifice felt connected to that promise, and I took extra service jobs after retirement age. I postponed replacing my truck, and Helen and I used the money we had planned for a trip to Nova Scotia when Claire needed help with the board exam course. I never said she owed us, and I never wanted her to carry that kind of debt. But there is a difference between refusing repayment and refusing limits. After Helen's diagnosis, Claire started managing more of our errands, and she scheduled appointments, handled groceries, and learned the passwords to several accounts because I spent months driving between work and treatment. None of that was wrong. It was help. It was also the first time I watched Claire speak about us in rooms where we were present. "Dad will handle the payment," she told a billing office once. "Mom cannot manage stairs right now," she told a neighbor. Both statements were true. Neither required asking us first, Helen noticed. One evening, she sat at the sewing table with the blue cover open beside her, and the room smelled like cedar and the lavender sachets she kept in the drawers. She'd been sorting buttons into old jelly jars, an activity that looked peaceful until I noticed her hands trembling. "Arthur," she said, "if I go first, promise me something." I hated the sentence before she finished it. "Do not let love make you easy to manage." I told her Claire loved us. Helen said she knew. Then she tapped the blue cover. "Love is not the question, access is." She had already written down the lawyer's number on a card inside the flap, and Samuel's name was in blue ink. Martin Cole's name was below it. Martin had been my friend since trade school, and he worked as an electrician until his knees gave out, then took a job running facilities for a public library. He was steady in the way some men are steady, because life gave them enough reasons to stop performing strength. And he had fixed our porch after a storm, brought soup after Helen's funeral, and sat with me in silence without treating silence like a problem. Helen trusted him. I did too. After she died, I spent 4 months believing I could keep every arrangement exactly as it had been, and I went to the grocery store on Thursdays because Helen had gone on Thursdays. I left her garden gloves on the hook in the garage, and I paid the cable bill from the same folder, although nobody watched the shows she liked anymore. Claire visited often then. She brought food, helped with mail, and sat through the first birthdays and holidays when I did not know what to say to anyone. She could be tender. That truth belongs in this story. It is why I did not see the danger quickly. The first request arrived while I was recovering from a fall on a wet porch, and Claire placed a packet on my kitchen table and said it would make emergencies easier if she could manage everything for me. "Everything?" I asked. "Only if you cannot," she said. The papers gave her more room than that sentence did, and Samuel explained the difference without accusing Claire of anything. He said authority should match the task, and my job was to decide who carried it. I chose Martin for medical decisions if I could not speak for myself, and I chose a professional service for the account that held my savings. Claire would receive what I planned for her in time, but she would not direct my life while I was alive. Then I signed the revocation of the old documents. I did not tell Claire every detail that afternoon. I told her I wanted help with practical things and I wanted decisions to stay mine. Her face went pale then too, although she covered it with a smile. "You think I want your money," she said. "I think I need a system that protects everyone," I answered. She took her coat and left before dinner. 3 days later, flowers arrived with a card that read, "I am sorry you feel alone." The words hurt because they were close enough to kindness to make me doubt myself. Samuel told me to keep the card. I put it inside the blue cover. I did not want revenge. I wanted a record of the moment concern began sounding like leverage. Claire apologized later. She said she had been overwhelmed. I accepted the apology because grief had left me hungry for ordinary family life. I also kept the arrangements Helen and I had made. That was my first boundary. It was not enough to stop what came later. The months before I got sick were full of small changes. Claire called more often, though many calls began with a question about money. She mentioned a new apartment near the medical center. She said the building was expensive because it was safe. She talked about refinancing her car. She asked whether I had considered simplifying my investments while markets felt uncertain. I answered carefully. I had enough for myself. I had set aside money for Claire after my death. I had also made it clear that my death was not a financial plan. One Sunday, she visited the house and stood near Helen's sewing room door. "Do you still keep all those old files in there?" she asked. "Some of them." "You should scan them. If something happens, nobody will know where anything is." I told her Samuel had copies of the important records. She looked toward the closed door for a second too long. "That seems excessive," she said. "Helen liked backups. Mom worried too much." I did not answer. Claire changed the subject and asked whether I wanted Thai food. At the time, I treated that look as curiosity. Later, I understood it as inventory. When I became ill, events moved faster than thought. I told Claire I did not feel well on a Thursday evening. By morning, my neighbor drove me to the hospital because Claire was covering a shift. She called during the ride and told me to keep my phone charged. Her voice had sounded worried. For the first 2 days, she called every few hours. She spoke to the staff through the normal channels available to family and asked me whether I needed anything from home. I asked for my reading glasses, my phone charger, and the blue cover from Helen's drawer. There was a pause. "Why do you need that?" she asked. "Because I do." She said she would look for it. The blue cover never arrived. On the fourth day, I asked again. Claire said the house was locked and she had been busy. I believed her because being sick makes simple explanations feel merciful. Then Samuel called through the hospital line. He had received a message from Claire asking whether he could send her copies of my account summaries because I was unable to manage urgent personal matters. Samuel did not send them. He called me instead. I remember pressing the phone against my ear and closing my eyes. The voice on the line was familiar. The facts were not. "Did you authorize Claire to access anything?" he asked. "No." "Did you ask her to contact me?" "No." Samuel spoke slowly. He asked whether I wanted him to do anything. I asked him to bring the blue cover from his office, where he had kept a certified copy after Helen and I changed the old arrangements. "I will come as soon as the hospital allows the paperwork review," he said. Claire appeared that same afternoon with the beige folder. The timing was too clean. She told the nurse she had found the old directive in a desk drawer. She said it had always reflected my wishes. She said I was too confused to remember signing anything else. I could have tried to interrupt her. I could have forced out each word and made the room watch me struggle. But I had watched Claire turn a small truth into a larger story before. If I gave her only my anger, she would call it confusion. So I watched. I let her tell everyone who I was. Then I waited for the record to answer. If you have ever learned that patience is different from surrender, leave your thoughts in the comments. The blue cover was already on its way, but I needed to know whether Claire had made one careless choice or built a plan around my silence. Samuel met Martin in the hospital's consultation room that afternoon. Martin came in wearing a wool cap and the same brown jacket he had owned for years. He had aged beside me, which is another way of saying he knew the version of me that existed before Claire had a title people admired. He did not enter my room until the staff said he could. When he did, he stood 6 feet away and gave me a small wave. His eyes were wet above his mask. "You look terrible," he said. I managed a breath that sounded close to a laugh. "You look old." "That is better," he said. Samuel explained the record in plain words. The old paper Claire carried had been revoked. The current documents named Martin if I could not make a decision myself. My financial accounts had no path through Claire. Samuel had also preserved her request for account summaries and the messages she had sent after I entered the hospital. Martin listened without trying to become a hero. "What does Arthur want?" he asked. Samuel looked at me. I wrote 2 words on a pad the nurse had left near my bed. "Time, proof." Martin nodded. That was the kind of friend he was. He could have taken my pencil, called people, and performed concern for a room full of strangers. Instead, he waited until I wrote what mattered. Samuel said the hospital would keep the disputed papers with the people responsible for review. Claire could not convert her medical training into control. Her statement would be considered as a daughter statement. Nothing more, nothing more. Those words gave me room to breathe. Samuel had printed Claire's emails. He did not hand them to me yet. He said I needed strength before I read them. I disliked being protected from facts, even by someone trying to help. Read them, I wrote. He started with the first message, sent less than 2 hours after my neighbor drove me to the hospital. It went to Samuel's general office address. Claire wrote that I had become unreliable, and that several urgent matters required someone to act quickly. She asked whether Samuel could identify which accounts were liquid, and whether a family member could receive information before outside people create delay. The phrase outside people stayed with me. Samuel had represented me for 3 decades. Martin had been in my life for 50 years. To Claire, they were outside because they stood between her and access. The second email came the next morning. Claire said her expenses had increased due to professional obligations and a lease commitment. She wrote that she did not intend to take advantage of me. Then she asked whether my estate plan included a way to release funds for a child facing temporary hardship. I closed my eyes. It was the phrase temporary hardship that hurt most. I had used it when I paid her rent during residency. I had used it when I replaced her car. I had used it when she called from an airport because a conference hotel had charged her card twice. Claire had taken my language and placed it beside the possibility of my death. Samuel read the last email without expression. It had been sent after she brought the old directive to the hospital. If Dad cannot communicate, I need to know who has decision authority, she wrote. His accounts cannot sit unmanaged while he is in crisis. She had copied no one else. She had signed it, Claire Bell, MD. The letters after her name looked heavier on paper than they ever had in conversation. I had helped her earn them. I had driven through snow to get her to interviews. I had sent groceries when she was too tired to shop. I had listened to her complain about supervisors who treated young doctors like replaceable parts. I had been proud of those letters. Now she had used them like a key. I felt anger then. It moved through me slowly because I did not have strength for a dramatic kind. I wanted to ask why she had made me into an obstacle before I was even gone. I wanted to ask why the daughter who had held Helen's hand could look at a file from that season and see a shortcut. But Samuel's papers answered one question already. This was not a mistake, it was a direction. Claire returned the next morning with coffee she had bought from the hospital lobby. She placed it on a side table where I could not reach it and asked whether I had slept. I looked at the cup. Then I looked at her. Dad? My throat was dry. I used the pad instead. Why April 2018? Claire read the question twice. What? I wrote again. Why that document? Her face remained controlled, although her hand tightened around the coffee lid. It was the one you kept at home, she said. You always told Mom you did not want extraordinary measures. Helen had been alive when I signed it. We had been frightened. We had talked through a future that became different after cancer entered our kitchen. Mom died, I wrote. Claire looked toward the window. I know. I changed it. You changed it because you were angry. That was the first honest thing she had said. I wrote one more line. You knew. Claire lowered herself into the visitor chair. For a few seconds, she looked less like a doctor and more like the little girl who used to sit at our kitchen counter with scraped knees, waiting for one of us to tell her whether trouble had become permanent. You shut me out, she said. I set a boundary. She read it, then pressed her lips together. You gave Martin everything. No, I gave him a role. You do not understand what it is like to have people assume I can handle everything because I am the doctor. I understood more than she knew. I had watched people lean on her until she began mistaking being needed for being entitled. Then you should understand asking, I wrote. Claire stood. You are making this cruel, she said. She left the coffee behind. The cup cooled beside my bed until a nurse threw it away. That conversation did not solve anything. It did something else. It removed the last innocent explanation I had been carrying. Claire had known the newer records existed. She believed my grief had made them unfair. She believed my illness had given her a chance to correct what she resented. She made a judgment about my life without permission. That realization made me precise. Samuel and Martin came back that afternoon with a plan that was less dramatic than anger and more useful. The hospital would keep questions of current authority with its own review process. Samuel would send the current record to the parties who needed it. Martin would accept the responsibility I had given him, then speak to me whenever I could answer. My financial institution would receive notice that Claire had no authority to request information or make changes. No one promised me a perfect result. No one called Claire a criminal. They preserved the line between what we knew and what needed independent review. That restraint mattered. When a family breaks, everyone wants a sentence that can simplify the damage. Real damage rarely offers one. Samuel asked whether I wanted to see the blue cover. I nodded. He placed it on my blanket. The clasp clicked when I opened it. Inside were the current documents, the card Helen had written, the flowers card Claire sent after I changed my arrangements, and a photograph from a summer picnic in 1997. Claire was 9 in that photograph. She sat on Helen's shoulders, holding a paper plate above both their heads because rain had started during our cookout. Helen was laughing. I was standing behind them with a grill fork in one hand and the useless confidence of a man who thought he could save burgers from weather. The photograph had a water stain in one corner. I touched it with one finger. Helen had kept documents beside memories because she knew people need both. Paper explains what happened. Love explains why it mattered. At the bottom of the cover, Samuel found a folded note in Helen's handwriting. I had forgotten it was there. It said, "Arthur, if you read this alone, call someone before you make any decision that hurts." Samuel saw the words and looked away. Martin rested his hand on the foot of my bed. I wrote, I called. He nodded. The next day, I could sit up for longer periods. My voice returned in pieces. I spoke slowly, and I hated how each sentence made people wait. Then I remembered that waiting was the point. The person who loves you does not punish you for needing time. Claire did not visit that morning. Samuel said she had sent another email. This one went to a financial service office that had handled one of my small investment accounts. She wrote that I was incapacitated and asked what documents a daughter needed to prevent bills from being missed. The office replied that it could not discuss my accounts with her. It forwarded the message to Samuel under the existing contact instructions. Claire had created a trail without knowing it. At first I felt sick reading that. Then I felt something clearer. She had been asked to respect the boundary. She had chosen to test every door around it. The old directive had already failed, yet Claire continued reaching for my life. The question was no longer whether she had made an error. The question was what she believed she deserved before I could answer her. Samuel asked me whether I wanted to meet with Claire once more when I had enough strength. He said a formal conversation could occur with Martin present and the records available. I did. I did not want to punish her in a hallway. I wanted her to hear the limit without the shelter of a phone call, a hurried signature, or a sentence spoken over my bed. The meeting took place in a plain consultation room 2 days later. There were no wooden benches, no judge, no relatives waiting to pick sides. A square table stood beneath a ceiling light. Someone had placed a box of tissues in the center and a plastic pitcher of water near the wall. Claire arrived first. She wore a gray sweater and no white coat. Without the coat, she looked younger. She also looked angry. Martin sat beside me. Samuel sat across from us with the blue cover closed in front of him. I had asked for the beige copy to be on the table too. Claire looked at it and said, "This feels unnecessary." "The documents are necessary," Samuel said. "The room is an opportunity to speak clearly." Claire folded her hands. "I was trying to protect Dad." I looked at her. "From what?" My voice was rough. "It was mine." She glanced at Samuel before answering. "From decisions made while you were scared. From outsiders taking advantage of a crisis. From bills and paperwork piling up while you could not manage them." "I had a lawyer," I said. "I had Martin." "You had people who wanted to keep me out." Martin did not move. "Claire," I said, "I named him." She looked down. "After Mom died, you started acting like I was dangerous." The sentence landed because part of it was true. I had become more careful, but caution is not condemnation. "After your mother died," I said, "I learned that grief makes people need structure. You used structure to punish me." Samuel opened the blue cover. He did not raise his voice. He placed the revocation beside the beige copy, then set the printed emails in a row. "Claire," he said, "this record does not rely on a conclusion about your intentions. It shows dates, requests, and responses." She stared at the pages. Samuel read the first line of the revocation again. "This revocation replaces every prior directive and removes Claire Bell from any role in Arthur Bell's medical or financial decisions." Claire's face lost color. That was the line from a hospital room. Here, with the older copy resting beside it, its meaning could not be moved by anger. Samuel touched the next page. The record was signed and witnessed in May 2019. The certified copy remained in my office. Mr. Bell also named Martin Cole as the independent representative for the limited role described here. Claire looked at Martin. "You knew?" Martin answered carefully. "Helen asked Arthur to choose someone who would listen before acting. He chose me." Claire's eyes filled, but she did not cry. "So you both hid it from me." "I did not hide my life from you," I said. "I kept it from being managed without me." Samuel placed the emails beside the revocation. "These were sent during Mr. Bell's hospitalization," he said. "They request account information, discuss personal obligations, and ask who could act if he could not communicate." Claire spoke quickly. "I had rent. I had student loans. I had responsibilities. I was trying to make sure nothing fell apart." "Your responsibilities were real," I said. "They were not mine to solve by disappearing." She looked at me then. For the first time since the hospital, she looked frightened. "I did not want you to die." I believed she may have believed that in the narrowest sense. People can want a person alive and still treat their weakness as an opportunity. That is one of the crueler truths inside families. "You wanted to decide what happened if I could not stop you," I said. Claire did not answer. Samuel explained what would happen next. He spoke in plain terms. Claire would have no role in decisions that belonged to Martin under the current record. She would receive no access to my accounts. Her request in a disputed document will be preserved for independent review. If anyone needed information about my condition, it would come from the channels I chose. No one threatened her. No one asked her to confess. The boundary was enough. Claire pushed her chair back. The legs scraped the floor. "You are taking everything away," she said. I looked at the blue cover. "No," I said. "I am keeping what was mine." She left the room carrying nothing. The beige copy stayed on the table. For a long time, none of us spoke. Martin poured water into a paper cup and slid it toward me. Samuel closed the blue cover and rested his hand on it. "Do you want to make any change today?" he asked. I thought of Helen's note. "Call someone before you make any decision that hurts." "No change today," I said. That answer surprised Samuel. "You are certain?" "I am tired," I said. "I am not erased." Martin smiled into his mask. "Recovery took longer than the meeting. That is true in every sense. My body improved by small measures. I walked a hallway with a nurse. I ate half a sandwich. I reached the bathroom without someone standing outside the door. Each thing felt embarrassing until I remembered that survival is made of ordinary humiliations survived in sequence. Claire sent 2 messages through Samuel during those weeks. The first said she was sorry I felt betrayed. The second said she had panicked and made poor choices. Neither used the word authority. Neither mentioned the date on the old directive. Neither asked what I needed. I did not answer. Silence can be a weapon. It can also be a boundary while you wait for language strong enough to hold. The independent review moved at its own pace. I will not pretend it ended with a dramatic phone call. Records went where records had to go. The financial office confirmed that Claire had no access. The hospital kept its own account of the disputed paperwork. Samuel handled communications so I did not have to recover inside every message. Claire lost the role she had tried to claim. That was the consequence. It was not satisfying in the shallow way people imagine consequences should be. There was no crowd. There was no headline. There was no moment when my daughter understood every year of sacrifice in one perfect burst. There was a locked door where she expected an open one. There was a record where she expected a story. There was Martin answering questions with my instructions in front of him. Weeks later, Samuel brought the blue cover back to my house. The snow had melted, and the street outside looked tired and brown. My neighbor had cleared the porch after each storm. The first day I returned, I stood in my own hallway for several minutes because home has a weight that buildings never teach you to name. The sewing room had remained closed while I was gone. Dust rested on the windowsill. Helen's old machine sat beneath its cover. The jelly jars of buttons stood in a line above the table, red, white, black, and pearl, each color sorted with the patience she used on everything that mattered. Samuel placed the blue cover on the table. "This belongs here," he said. I ran my hand across the faded cardboard. "It belongs with me," I said. He nodded. I put it in the drawer, then stopped before closing it. For years, I had treated the drawer like a small museum. I went there to keep Helen from feeling completely gone. Now I understood that she had left more than reminders. She had left instructions for how I could remain myself when someone else found it convenient to forget. Martin came by the following Saturday morning. He brought coffee from a diner near his apartment and a paper bag with 2 cinnamon rolls. He did not ask whether Claire had called. He did not ask whether I wanted to discuss the review. He asked whether my porch light had started flickering again. "It comes on late," I said. "Then we will fix it after breakfast." We sat at the kitchen table where I had paid Claire's first tuition bill. Sunlight crossed the wood between us. Martin poured coffee into Helen's mismatched mugs because he knew which one had a chip near the handle and gave it to himself without comment. I had placed the blue cover on the counter beside the sugar bowl. Martin looked at it. "You keeping it there?" "For a while. Good place for it." I thought about Claire. I thought about the girl on Helen's shoulders, the woman in the gray sweater, and the daughter who had looked at an old document as though it could turn fear into permission. I missed her. Missing someone does not make them safe to trust. That sentence hurt, but it was clean. Martin raised his cup. "To being home," he said. I lifted mine. "To being heard." We drank our coffee while the porch light waited for repair and the blue cover rested in the morning sun. If this story reminded you that dignity can begin with one clear record, leave your thought below. Subscribe when patient truth matters more than noise. Helen had once told me that a gift is not a seat at someone else's steering wheel. I had spent years learning how to give without counting. In the end, I learned the other half. Love without a limit can become an invitation to disappear. The blue cover went back into the drawer after breakfast. Martin fixed the porch light before noon. When he left, I stood in the doorway and watched him walk to his car through the weak spring sun. Then I closed the door, not against the world, for myself,